receiver begins to talk about suicide.
So the question is, if they begin to talk about it, not if they're saying they're going to
If
commit
they begin
suicide.
to talk about it.
Well, I think this is something we all should add to. If your care receiver begins to talk about suicide, I'd say make sure they keep talking. Talk with them about that. And really, you want to kind of, if your care receiver is starting to talk about suicide, you want to kind of sort through a couple of key issues. One is you want to clarify if they're thinking about doing something to harm themselves, and that's a real. That kind of feels like an awkward question to ask, but it actually is fairly natural to say. You know, it sounds like you're thinking about possibly harming yourself or doing something to harm yourself, and then they can answer that. And if they say yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking, then you kind of go to the next level, which is, well, tell me about what you're thinking. Get them to tell you a little bit about what's going on, and do they have a plan? You want to sort through, do they have a plan? And if they do have a plan, do they then have the means? And if the answer to both those last couple questions is yeah, then you need to stay there, and you need to talk with that person, and you need to really assess if this seems like a real threat. And if the answer to those last two questions is yes, and they can vocalize that they in fact have a plan, and they can tell you kind of here's what they're thinking, then you've got to start going to the next level of thinking about intervention.
They're in crisis at that.
And I would even say if they're talking about it or bringing it up, it's out of our lane.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Thank you.
yeah.
Absolutely. One of the things that
We need to call
when I first sit and talk with somebody, they sign that agreement to receive care. And suicide is one of those things where confidentiality goes out the window there. So that's the time. You should all have the pastor on call number in your phone. You shouldn't leave that individual if you have a minute. There are times, probably in the number of times that I've done referrals, the years, I would guess probably 5 or 6 times that I've sat and said, have you considered suicide? And just that bluntly, because I certainly don't want that person to be passed on to a Stephen minister. And the pastors here are amazing, and they're very reactive about these situations. So it doesn't matter the time of day or what's going on. So there's lots of resources. Just make sure that you have a vehicle. And I never hesitate to say honestly to those potential care receivers or care receivers, this is something I have to get someone involved in, and I want you to know that. And only one time have I had to call a pastor into the little memorial chapel to come help right then. But they're great about that. But if you'd rather err on the side of being reactive or too reactive, maybe, than to ever have regrets. And it's easy to look somebody in the eye and say, you're too important to me for me to let this lay. I've got to do something now. And most of the time, they're very responsive to that. They're ready to have somebody else step in and help them work through that.
Cheryl, I'm not sure that probing about somebody making a comment about suicide is something that we probably don't necessarily need to go down that rabbit hole. I think the issue is if somebody mentions suicide, at that point, I would think we would need to act on that.
Right. The only time I've ever probed is when in our conversation, they've said enough about severe depression, whatever red flags that I'm hearing, that they haven't said that word, but make no mistake, it's not time to be tentative about an honest relationship with them. And that's not to say that you're saying, sorry, we can't help you. It's saying you matter too much for us to leave this at this point and to go the Stephen ministry route. We need to find some other resources.
So as a Stephen minister, not a Stephen leader, our response should be immediately get in touch with the Stephen leader or with the pastor.
I would get in touch with a pastor, and they have access immediately to the, some of the other resources. Kathy's had this experience with how responsive the pastors have been, so, yeah.
And I think I would just add a little bit of detail as to, if we're with our care receiver and they've raised the issue, I think we do have a certain responsibility to try to figure out how imminent, kind of where they are in that, so that we know what the right level of additional resource there is to get. If somebody's showing signs of depression, and they're saying, I oftentimes think that things would be better if I'm not here.
I just don't know if I can live another day. I just don't know if I can do this anymore.
Yeah, there are some things that are commonly said that don't necessarily mean that person's an imminent suicide threat.
Yeah, but if they
But
say the
that-
word suicide, I see this every day, guys, so if they say the word suicide, that's a trigger for me to basically get them help.
Yes,
Yeah.
I would,
Yeah.
100% agree.
But there's a lot of conversation that goes on before that.
Which I'm aware of, but
100%.
I'm just saying, I don't want to make it lightly, and I need to basically probe into, are they suicidal or not? If that comes up in a conversation, that needs to be acted on.
Right.
No, I
I would-
agree, and I don't think anybody's saying anything differently. If a care
Right,
receiver
I
says,
agree.
I'm thinking about killing myself, or, I'm thinking about seriously about suicide, or I'm having suicidal thoughts, yeah, that's an indicator that we need to stay with that person and go to that level, that next level of getting help right then. There are a lot of precursor statements that can happen before that we need to pay attention to. And typically, those are gonna be indication that if they don't already have a mental health professional involved, it's time to get a mental health professional involved without necessarily calling the suicide hotline at that earlier point.
Can we make sure that everybody has that pastor on the call number
Sure.
in their phones?
Why don't I send it out in an email so that even people who aren't here, or the small group.
At what point do you call
Different
911?
pastors would.
It's 988, remember?
Or 988?
Yeah, 988.
Well, if they've got the means right there and they're telling you they're getting ready to walk out of the door and go do something, I would say that would be my opinion.
So this is a great plug for our speaker that we're gonna have in March, is from NAMI, and he's gonna speak on suicide, and he's gonna be a great speaker. And we were just talking in leadership about making this a Stephen Ministries sponsored thing where we open it up to whoever comes to the congregation and, to come listen, because this person, he's just got really great information.
To answer your question, I would feel like if you feel, if the hairs on the back of your neck are standing up and you feel like this person is talking about suicide, if you call 988 and it's not, he wasn't suicidal, oh well.
Oh darn.
I mean, seriously, that's how I feel about it. So call 988 if I agree. Speaking about suicide is a cry for help. 988 is a great number, okay? And so being too cautious or being, what's the word?
Overreacting.
Yeah.
Be
Just
tentative or.
don't be tentative. If you feel like they're suicidal, if you're concerned, call 988. Stay with them, call 988. And if they're not, then they're gonna get some help. That whole point of all this is getting them help, right? So anyway, that's where I am.
I'm having trouble with visualizing this and the mechanics of the situation. So you call, they answer the phone. Do you say, I've got somebody here that's thinking about taking their own life? Do you want to talk to them? Do you then hand the phone to them and let them talk to them.
Don't they,
If you
they
get-
know what to do, they
I
take
think they
over.
know what to do.
They'll
Like,
ask.
what about the pastor on call? If you call the pastor on call, what would be the words you would say to the pastor? If you're sitting there across from your care receivers that's just told you that.
Write out, say, this person is thinking of
Yeah.
harming themselves.
Yeah.
Would you please help?
If whatever the situation is. you-
Don't hide, don't bat around the bush.
I agree.
It's just bring it out in the open.
So my care receiver just told me blah, 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 and I'm sitting here with them, and I care too much about them to leave them alone, and so I'm gonna sit here, but this is what's going on, this is what they've said to me.
And
I
it's-
would
it's got-
repeat what they
There's a
said.
stigma because it's mental health, but as the same person
No.
saying, oh my God, my chest, I can't breathe, you're calling 911. You know what I'm saying? And so
Right.
it's like
Exactly.
same
And
person.
exactly, so that's why I wouldn't hesitate to pick up that phone, dial 988, I just wouldn't. And it's,
What would you do in a situation where you have reason to believe that there's a family member that would be responsive and would be willing to take the care receiver to an emergency room in lieu of calling?
You mean if
988?
you had that?
Yeah.
Well, on your referral sheet, you know, there's a person to contact in case of an emergency that I get from everybody. So, I mean, in that situation, you could certainly say to your care receiver, I would like to call your husband, wife, whatever, your sister, and I would love for them to come, you know, spend some time with you. Cause I'm concerned, I'd like for you to go to the emergency room or whatever,
Right.
but,
You stay
What
with
if they
them.
get up and leave?
Well, that's when you would call 988.
yeah.
Right.
it's a tough situation, but.
Yeah, it is.
But, you know, I think that what, John, you said it, it's the stigma, or no, Andon, the stigma of, if I'm having a heart attack, you're gonna call 911 for me, right? Same gig. It's, you know, mental health disease is the same as cardiac disease, as respiratory disease, as anything. So,
But also, if they've even brought the topic up
yes,
or danced around, they're asking for help.
they are.
That's it.
You
They're
know? So
screaming.
they're looking at you kind
They're
of like,
screaming
yeah,
for
well,
help.
yeah.
They don't know what to do. So all of those conversations.
Yeah.
Yep, I mean, that's screaming for help. Even the ones that are talking about, I don't know how I can live another day. I don't know how I can survive this. That's not suicidal talk, but it's screaming for help. It's saying, I need some mental health help. So, you know, those are important things to listen for. Mental health disease is huge, and we need to be very aware of it.